Hi everyone, my name is Mary Alberto, and my presentation is on the article Language Switch Costs and Sentence Comprehension Depends on Language Dominance, Evidence from Self-Paced Reading by Sabrine Boltena, Ton Dijkstra, and Janet G. Van Hal. So this research paper roots from a theoretical view that parallel activation is present in bilingualism. In other words, it just means that multiple languages can be active in a person's mind all at the same time, and particularly for those who are bilingual. Some popular research studies that have been done under this theoretical view is on a study of to what extent are other languages active in a person's mind. And some popular studies have been done on the idea of cognates and whether they've been helpful in different aspects of language. The main purpose of this particular study is to examine if there is a switch cost between L1 and L2 languages for bilinguals in sentence comprehension. So some key characteristics they looked into was translation, and translation is the conversion from one language to another, and whether this process of conversion creates a switch cost for bilinguals. And the next thing they looked into was switch direction, which is the direction in which a person is speaking, whether that's from L1 to L2, which are known as forward switches, and from L2 to L1, which are backward switches, and whether forward switches or backward switching can influence the size of the switch cost. The next thing they looked into was cross-linguistic overlap. Cross-linguistic overlap, or in particular, are defined as the influence of one language onto another. And in this particular concept in this experiment, they looked at how cognates can speed up or help with switching. And cognates are words that have similar sound, meaning, and spelling in multiple languages. The next thing they looked into was proficiency in sentence comprehension, and they looked at the level of proficiency, particularly for L2 speakers, to see if that had an effect on switch costs in sentence comprehension. Some predictions that they made was that the process of translation and switch direction can be influenced by cross-linguistic overlaps or cognates, and also proficiency, the level of proficiency can affect these processes because of the theoretical view that other languages can be active in a person's mind. And this is supported by another article that these researchers have done called Switch Cost Modulation in Bilingual Sentence Processing, Evidence from Shadowing, but also Caroline Udez's article called Cognate's Effect in Bilingual Language Comprehension Tasks show that translation or processes similar can be sped up or helped with higher proficiency and cognates. So this led to two hypotheses. How does language switching direction affect switch costs in sentence context? And next, are switch costs modulated by L2 proficiency in cross-linguistics? So this experiment was done with 68 Dutch and English bilinguals, and the stimulus was composed of 40 different declarative main clauses with a subject, verb, object sentence. 8 sentences were constructed by a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design in order to make sure that there was always a switch cost in the sentence, and also to manipulate the verbs used in this experiment. These sentences were presented through a Windows XP Intel Pentium 4 CPU computer with a 17-inch Philips 107 MB monitor. There was a presentation software and a button box that measured reading times. Reading times were measured from the moment the word was shown until the word was gone. This experiment required participants to read each word one by one, and at the end of the sentence, they were required to rate the predictability of the next word. So here we have some tables that show us samples of the sentences used in the experiment, results of cognates and control verbs, and here we have the results of reading times regarding language, and switch manipulations and cognates. And here is just this table is just results from all of the different word positionings. And here just looks at language and the effects of language and cognates. So overall, the results showed through univariate analysis that word positioning went down the line, reading times became slower. So that meant that when words started from word positioning 3, the reading time for that sentence was much slower than the reading times that started from word positioning 2. And the data also suggested that participants performed better with sentences that began with L1 rather than L2. And some factors that they found were key factors of this results that they looked into was language switching, sentence comprehension, and cross-linguistic overactivation, and L2 proficiency. One key factor with the word positioning, they found that there was only a main effect in word positioning 6, the content word after the switch, with a mean reading time of 4:59. Essentially, they found that this was one of the only word positionings that did not have a slower reading time. In sentence comprehension, it showed that forward switches were more difficult than backward switches. Cross-linguistic activation, it showed that the results showed that cognates had no effect in reading times in sentence comprehension versus sentences that had non-cognate control verbs. And essentially that cognates were not helpful or sped up the process of switching. Lastly, they looked into L2 proficiency, and results showed that the higher proficiency in L2 languages resulted with less of a switch cost. So in conclusion, we find that switch cost depends on the type of switch that is made, whether it's a comprehension or production switch, and that those two switches are different. Then we found that proficiency matters, more importantly for L2 languages, and that the amount of proficiency will affect the size of the switch cost. And if the person is proficient in their L2 language, then there is no switch cost, which was found in the study done with professional Spanish speakers, where they found that there was no switch costs since they were proficient in their in both English and in Spanish. A limitation of this particular research is the portion on cognates, as other papers, such as Caroline Udez's paper on cognates, found that as individual words, they are helpful in translation and can help with speeding up the switch between two languages. So for future studies, I think it would be helpful if they investigate why cognates are helpful as words, but not within sentence context. Lastly, I think this research is helpful for people like me who are bilinguals and struggled with things like this, sentence comprehension, because it helps me understand the different factors that can affect my ability to speak and produce and comprehend other languages. And so with that said, it is important to bilingualism because it allows us to understand the differences in sentence structures within languages that can make it more difficult to produce and understand language. Thank you.